It started as a simple job. I had been doing handyman work around town for a few years, taking on odd jobs here and there to help people fix what needed fixing. One afternoon, I received a call from Mrs. Caroline, a 61-year-old widow who had recently moved into a quiet part of town. Her voice was soft over the phone, explaining that she needed some repairs done around her house. She mentioned a few things: a leaky faucet, a broken shelf, nothing major. I agreed to come by the next day. When I arrived, Mrs. Caroline greeted me at the door with a warm smile. She had silver hair that fell just past her shoulders, her skin lightly wrinkled, but with a glow that came from a life well lived. She wore a simple but elegant dress, something that spoke of her grace. She showed me around the house, pointing out the things she wanted me to fix. As she led me through each room, I couldn't help but notice how meticulously everything was arranged, each detail reflecting a woman who cared deeply for her home. Over the next few hours, I worked steadily, fixing what needed to be done. Mrs. Caroline stayed close, offering me water, checking in on my progress, and occasionally engaging in small talk. At first, our conversation was light, but as the hours went by, it became more personal. She talked about her late husband, about how lonely the house felt now that she was alone. There was a sadness in her eyes when she spoke about him, but also a quiet strength. It was clear that she had loved him deeply, and that his absence had left a void in her life. As the afternoon sun began to set, I finished up the last repair, wiping my hands clean. Mrs. Caroline invited me to stay for tea, and though I had other work to do, something about her gentle manner made it impossible to refuse. We sat in her cozy kitchen, sipping tea, the air between us thick with unspoken words. She looked at me over the rim of her cup, her eyes studying me intently. "You've been such a great help today," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to go beyond mere gratitude. "It's been a long time since I've had someone to talk to, someone to help me around the house." I smiled, feeling a strange sense of connection to her, one that I couldn't quite explain. "It's my job, Mrs. Caroline," I said, though the words felt inadequate for what was brewing between us. She set her cup down, her fingers lingering on the handle. "Call me Caroline, please," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's no need for formalities." Something shifted in the room then, an unspoken tension that neither of us addressed directly. The silence between us grew heavier, but not uncomfortable. It was charged with something more, something deeper. I could feel her eyes on me, could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking my video. And I knew in that moment that this was no longer just a routine job. She stood up slowly, her movements graceful, and walked over to me, her eyes never leaving mine. I felt my breath catch in my throat as she came closer, her presence commanding yet tender. She stopped just in front of me, her hand reaching out to lightly touch my arm. The warmth of her touch sent a ripple through me, and I knew this was more than just a casual gesture. "I haven't felt this way in a long time," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, as though she was unsure of how I would react. "It's been so long since I've allowed myself to feel anything." Her admission hung in the air between us, and I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of rejection, the hope for something more. My heart raced as I realized what she was asking of me, not in words, but in the way she stood there, so close, yet waiting for me to make the next move. I reached out, placing my hand over hers, feeling the softness of her skin beneath my fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her face inches from mine. I could see every line, every detail of her age, but it only made her more beautiful, more real. Her breath was warm against my cheek, and the smell of her perfume filled my senses. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us, our foreheads touching in a moment of shared understanding. She responded immediately, her hands moving to my shoulders, pulling me closer. The connection deepened, slow and gentle at first, but growing more intense with each passing second. There was a hunger in her that matched my own, a longing that had been buried for too long. Her hands wandered to the back of my neck, her touch sending shivers down my spine. When we finally pulled apart, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of desire and uncertainty. "I didn't think I could feel this way again," she whispered, her voice shaky but full of emotion. "But with you I do." I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the age difference, not the fact that this had started as just another job. What we had between us now was real, and it was undeniable. I pulled her into my arms again, holding her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against my chest. For the next several hours, we stayed in that embrace, moving through the house together as if the world outside didn't exist. We talked, we laughed, sharing stories that revealed our hopes and dreams, each moment drawing us closer together. There was no rush, no need to hurry. We had all the time in the world. At one point, she led me to the living room, where a soft fire crackled in the hearth. Don't miss out on the journey to 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button now and be part of something big before everyone else. The flickering light cast a warm glow over her face, making her look even more radiant. She sat down on the couch and gestured for me to join her. I did, and as soon as I sat, she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. It felt natural, like we had been doing this for years, even though it was still so new. As the night wore on, the conversation turned deeper. Caroline opened up to me about the years she spent alone after her husband passed. She had built walls around her heart, she said, to protect herself from the pain of loneliness. But with me, those walls had begun to crumble, and she wasn't afraid anymore. I listened, my heart aching for her but also swelling with a strange sense of pride that I had been the one to help her feel again. In the quiet moments that followed, I realized that this wasn't just about physical attraction. There was something more, something deeper growing between us. The age difference, the circumstances, none of it mattered. What we had was real, and it went beyond anything I had ever experienced before. I looked down at her, her eyes half closed as she relaxed against me, and I knew that I wanted more than just a fleeting moment. I wanted to be there for her, to fill the empty spaces in her life, just as she had unknowingly begun to fill mine. As the fire died down and the house grew quieter, Caroline looked up at me with a smile, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on my arm. "I don't want this to end," she said softly, her voice laced with a hint of uncertainty. I smiled back at her, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "It doesn't have to," I whispered, my words filled with a promise that I meant with every fiber of my being. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with hope, and in that moment I knew we had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. As the fire's last embers flickered, casting dancing shadows around the room, I felt the weight of the moment settle heavily between us. Caroline's hand lingered on my arm, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to find reassurance for what had just begun. There was no denying the connection that had ignited between us. But now, with the silence pressing in, we both understood that this wasn't just a fleeting encounter. Her lips parted slightly, and in her gaze I saw vulnerability, the kind that only comes after years of guarding oneself, only to let someone else inside. She had opened up to me completely, trusting me with her heart, her thoughts, and I felt the gravity of that trust in every beat of her pulse beneath my fingertips. "I need you to know something," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as though she was afraid to speak it aloud. "I've never felt so alive, not since my husband, and not like this. But it scares me too. I'm not a young woman anymore. I never thought I'd have this again, this feeling, this connection." Her confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, and I could sense the battle inside her. She was terrified of losing herself again, of falling into something she hadn't expected but couldn't resist. Her eyes glistened, and for a brief moment, I saw the weight of all her years, the pain of the past, the loneliness she had endured. Yet beneath it all there was a spark, a yearning that had finally been reignited. I cupped her face gently, pulling her close until our foreheads touched. "You don't have to be afraid, Caroline," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "This isn't just about the moment. It's about us, what we're creating together. I want to be here for you, not just tonight, but tomorrow and every day after. I don't care about the years between us or what anyone else might say. I see you and I want you, all of you." The intensity of my words seemed to wash over her, her breath catching in her throat as she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a warm embrace. In that moment, I felt everything, the fear, the longing, the surrender. And as we held each other, our hearts pounding in sync, I knew this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something neither of us could have ever predicted. As we sat there, the fire crackling softly in the background, I could sense the comfort we found in each other's presence. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in that cozy room, sharing stories and laughter that filled the air with warmth. Caroline spoke of her dreams, her her passions, and the things she had always wanted to do but never had the chance to pursue. I listened intently, captivated by her spirit and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the things she loved. In turn, I shared my own aspirations, the little things that brought me joy, and the journey that had led me to this moment. We discovered common interests, shared laughter over silly anecdotes, and found solace in the understanding that we were both seeking connection in a world that often felt isolating. As the night deepened, I felt a sense of peace envelop us. It was as if we had created our own little sanctuary, a space where we could be ourselves without judgment or fear. Caroline's laughter echoed in my ears, a sound that felt like music, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of how this simple job had turned into something so profound. Eventually, the conversation began to slow, and we found ourselves simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Caroline leaned her head against my shoulder again, and I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close. The warmth of her presence was comforting, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing as she relaxed against me. In that moment, I realized that what we had was more than just a fleeting connection. It was a bond that had formed through shared experiences and mutual understanding. I wanted to be there for her, to support her as she navigated this new chapter in her life, just as she had unknowingly supported me in ways I hadn't anticipated. As the fire flickered low, casting soft shadows around the room, I knew that this was just the beginning of our journey together. We had both taken a leap of faith, stepping into the unknown, and I felt a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. Whatever challenges we might face, I was ready to embrace them, knowing that we would face them together. The warmth of the moment wrapped around us like a cozy blanket, and I could sense that we were both ready to explore this new path together. Caroline's gentle presence was a balm to my soul, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the connection we had forged. As the last embers of the fire glowed softly, I took a deep breath, savoring the tranquility of the evening. "You know," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never expected to find such a meaningful connection while doing handyman work. It's amazing how life can surprise us." Caroline smiled, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful experiences," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. I had almost given up on feeling this way again, but here we are. Her words resonated with me, and I nodded in agreement. It's like we were meant to meet at this point in our lives. I feel like we both needed this, someone to share our stories with, to remind us that we're not alone. She looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, it's comforting to know that there's someone who understands. I've spent so many years feeling isolated, but tonight feels different. It feels like a new beginning." I squeezed her shoulder gently, wanting her to know that I was there for her. "It is a new beginning, Caroline. We can take our time to explore this connection, to see where it leads us. There's no rush." Her smile widened, and I could see the hope in her eyes. "I would like that very much. It's been a long time since I've allowed myself to dream about the future." We sat in companionable silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's company. The flickering light from the fire created a dance of shadows on the walls, and I felt a sense of peace settle over us. It was a moment of pure connection, free from the worries of the outside world. Eventually, Caroline spoke again, her voice soft. "What do you think the future holds for us? I mean, realistically." I took a moment to consider her question. "I think it holds whatever we want it to hold. We can take it one day at a time, see where our paths lead. We can explore new experiences together, support each other, and build something meaningful." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That sounds perfect. I want to embrace this feeling, to see where it takes us. I've spent too long being cautious, and I don't want to miss out on what could be." I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at her words. "Then let's make a pact to be open to whatever comes our way. We can create new memories, share laughter, and support each other through the ups and downs." Caroline's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I would love that. It feels like a fresh start, a chance to rediscover joy." As the night wore on, we continued to talk, sharing our hopes and dreams, our fears and aspirations. Each word brought us closer, weaving a tapestry of connection that felt both fragile and strong. I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, hand in hand, ready to embrace the journey that awaited us. In that cozy room, with the fire crackling softly and the world outside forgotten, I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a feeling of hope, of possibility, and I knew that this was just the beginning of something beautiful.